You need to step outside now." The words hung in the sanctuary like smoke after a gunshot. Officer Dale Brennan didn't ask. He commanded. His hand rested on his belt, fingers grazing the radio clipped just inches from his weapon. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across his face, making his jaw look sharper, his eyes colder. It was 11:43 a.m. on a Sunday morning in the heart of Richmond, Virginia, and inside the New Hope Community Church. A place built on grace and refuge, those 4 words shattered everything. Pastor Jerome Wallace stood at the pulpit, his Bible still open to the book of Matthew. He was 52 years old, wearing a navy suit with a burgundy tie, reading glasses perched low on his nose. He'd been mid-sermon when the 2 officers walked in. The congregation of about 80 people, mostly black families, a few white members, and some college students, had turned their heads toward the back doors. No one expected police, not here, not during worship. Pastor Jerome didn't flinch. He closed the Bible slowly, removed his glasses, and placed them on the wooden lectern. Then he looked directly at Officer Brennan and said, "This is a house of God. You're welcome to worship with us, but I'm not leaving my pulpit." Officer Brennan's jaw tightened. His partner, Officer Craig Hendricks, a younger man with nervous eyes, stood a few steps behind him, scanning the room like he expected trouble. Brennan took 3 steps forward, boots heavy on the tile floor. Someone coughed. A baby whimpered. The air grew thick. "We received a call," Brennan said, voice loud enough to carry across the entire sanctuary. "A disturbance. Public nuisance. We're here to remove the individual responsible." Deacon Leonard Hayes, 61, a retired postal worker with silver hair and a calm demeanor, stood up from the front pew. "Officer, there's no disturbance here. We're in the middle of a service. Whatever call you got, it's a mistake." Brennan didn't even glance at him. His eyes stayed locked on Jerome. "I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to him." Jerome stepped down from the pulpit, slow and deliberate. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush. He walked to the center aisle and stopped about 10 feet from Brennan. "If someone called in a complaint, I'd like to know what it was. We've been here since 10 a.m. conducting a peaceful worship service. You can ask anyone in this room." Brennan smirked. It wasn't a smile. It was dismissal wrapped in contempt. "We got a report of aggressive solicitation and loitering outside this building. Witnesses say a man matching your description was harassing people near the entrance." Sister Rochelle Bennett, 38, a schoolteacher with 3 kids, stood up, voice trembling but clear. "That's a lie. Pastor Jerome's been inside this whole time. We all saw him." Brennan turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge her. "Ma'am, sit down. This doesn't concern you." Rochelle didn't sit. "It concerns all of us. You're accusing our pastor of something he didn't do." Officer Hendricks shifted his weight, uncomfortable. He muttered something to Brennan, too low for anyone to hear. Brennan waved him off and took another step toward Jerome. "I need to see your ID." Jerome reached slowly into his jacket pocket. The room tensed. Every eye followed his hand. He pulled out a wallet, opened it, and handed over his driver's license. Brennan glanced at it, then handed it to Hendricks without a word. Hendricks walked toward the door, presumably to run the information. "While we wait," Brennan said, folding his arms. "You want to tell me why you're so defensive?" Jerome's voice stayed steady. "I'm not defensive. I'm protecting my congregation from being intimidated in their own church." "Intimidated?" Brennan laughed. It was short, sharp, ugly. "Nobody's intimidating anyone. We're doing our job." Antoine Fisher, 29, a construction worker and lifelong member of New Hope, stood up from the back row. "Your job is to protect people, not harass them." Brennan's head snapped toward him. "Sit down before I add obstruction to the list." Antoine didn't sit. He stepped into the aisle. "What list?" "There's no crime here." Brennan's hand moved to his radio. "Officer Hendricks, I need backup. We've got multiple individuals refusing to comply." Hendricks looked up from his notepad, eyes wide. "Dale, maybe we should just call it in," Brennan snapped. Hendricks hesitated, then pressed the button on his radio. His voice cracked slightly as he spoke into it. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47 requesting backup at 1552 Grove Street. Multiple subjects, possible escalation." The sanctuary erupted, not in violence but in voices. People stood. Some shouted. Others prayed aloud. Deacon Leonard raised his hands, trying to calm everyone. "Brothers and sisters, please. Let's not give them a reason. But the damage was done. Brennan turned back to Jerome, his face flushed. "You're under arrest." Jerome blinked. "For what?" "Disorderly conduct, obstruction, and failure to comply with a lawful order." Sister Loretta Sanders, 68, a church elder who had been sitting quietly in the second row, stood up, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "You can't arrest a man for standing in his own church." Brennan pulled out his handcuffs. "Watch me." He moved toward Jerome. Jerome didn't resist, but he didn't comply either. He stood still, arms at his sides, eyes locked on Brennan's face. "If you're going to arrest me, do it in front of everyone. Let them see." Brennan grabbed Jerome's wrist. The room gasped. Rochelle screamed. Antoine surged forward, but Deacon Leonard grabbed his shoulder, holding him back. Brennan twisted Jerome's arm behind his back hard enough to make him wince. Then he slapped the cuffs on, metal clicking into place. "You're making a mistake," Jerome said, voice tight with pain but still calm. Brennan shoved him toward the door. "The only mistake here is yours." As they moved down the aisle, the congregation closed in, not aggressively but protectively. They formed a loose barrier, not blocking, just present. Brennan barked at them to move. Hendricks looked terrified, hand hovering near his weapon. Then the doors burst open. 2 more officers entered, batons drawn. The room exploded into shouts, prayers, and panic, but Jerome, even with his hands cuffed behind his back, called out over the noise. "Don't fight them. Don't give them what they want. Record this. Remember this. And when I'm gone, you stand." Brennan dragged him through the doors and into the bright Virginia sunlight. The congregation poured out after them, phones raised, voices raised, faith raised like a shield. And that's when the real fight began, not with fists or weapons, but with something far more powerful. The truth, spoken loudly, recorded clearly, and witnessed by everyone who refused to look away. Because Pastor Jerome Wallace wasn't just a man being arrested. He was a symbol of every injustice that walks into sacred spaces and demands submission. And his congregation, standing on those church steps with their phones and their voices and their unshakable belief in what was right, they weren't just witnesses. They were warriors. And the battle had only just begun. The patrol car sat at the curb, engine idling, exhaust curling into the humid air. Officer Brennan opened the back door and shoved Pastor Jerome inside, hand pressing down on his head like he was handling a criminal, not a pastor. Jerome didn't resist. He sat, hands cuffed behind him, shoulders squared, eyes forward. The door slammed shut. Through the window he could see his congregation gathering on the church steps, faces twisted in disbelief and fury. Sister Rochelle was the first to pull out her phone. She held it high, recording everything. Antoine stood beside her, shouting at Brennan. "You got a badge number? What precinct are you from? We're filing a complaint." Brennan ignored him. He walked around to the driver's side, opened the door, and paused. Then he turned back, looked directly at the crowd, and said, "Anyone who interferes with this arrest will be charged. Clear the area." Deacon Leonard stepped forward, hands raised, voice calm but firm. "We're not interfering. We're observing. That's our right." Brennan's lip curled. "Your right ends when it becomes obstruction." Hendricks, standing awkwardly near the passenger door, looked between Brennan and the crowd. His face was pale. He muttered something under his breath, then got into the car. Brennan followed. The engine revved. The car pulled away from the curb, and the congregation watched it disappear down Grove Street, carrying their pastor like cargo. For a moment, no one moved. The shock was too thick. Then Loretta Sanders, the church elder, broke the silence. Her voice was low, steady and sharp as a nail. "Get inside, now. We need to make calls." They filed back into the sanctuary, but the service was over. No one sat in the pews. They gathered in the fellowship hall, a large room behind the sanctuary with folding tables, old coffee makers, and a bulletin board covered in flyers. Rochelle's hands were shaking as she replayed the video on her phone. "I got it. I got all of it. Him grabbing Jerome, the cuffs, everything." Antoine leaned over her shoulder. "Send it to me." "I'm posting it." Deacon Leonard raised a hand. "Wait, before we post anything, we need to think. We need a plan." "A plan?" Antoine's voice rose. "They just arrested our pastor for nothing. What plan do you need?" "The plan is to show everyone what just happened." Leonard didn't argue. He just said, "And then what?" The room went quiet. Leonard continued, his voice gentle but insistent. "I'm not saying don't post it. I'm saying we need to do more than post. We need lawyers. We need witnesses to write statements. We need to contact the NAACP, the ACLU, every civil rights group we can reach. We need to organize, Loretta nodded. He's right. This isn't just about Pastor Jerome. This is about all of us. When they came into our church, they disrespected our sanctuary. If we don't respond the right way, they'll do it again. Rochelle wiped her eyes. So what do we do first? Loretta pulled out her phone. First, we call Attorney Simmons. She's handled police misconduct cases before. Then we call the media. Every station. Every paper. We make noise, but we make it smart. Within 20 minutes, the fellowship hall had transformed into a command center. Rochelle sent the video to a dozen people. Antoine started a group chat with members of nearby churches. Deacon Leonard called Marcus Simmons, a civil rights attorney who had represented black families in Richmond for over 30 years. And Loretta, sitting at the head of a folding table, wrote down names, numbers, and a timeline of events. But while they organized, Pastor Jerome sat in the back of a patrol car, hands still cuffed, head resting against the window. He wasn't afraid. He'd been through worse. He'd grown up in Richmond in the 1970s, back when segregation wasn't just a memory but a lived reality. He'd seen churches bombed. He'd seen peaceful protests met with dogs and hoses. He'd watched his own father, Reverend Thomas Wallace, get dragged from a voting rights march and beaten so badly he spent 3 days in the hospital. Jerome had sworn he'd never let that happen to him. He'd gone to seminary, earned his degree, and dedicated his life to building a church that would stand as a fortress for his community. New Hope wasn't just a place to worship. It was a place to organize, to educate, to resist. And now, sitting in the back of this car, he realized that his father's fight had never ended. It had just shapeshifted. The car pulled into the precinct parking lot. Brennan cut the engine and got out. Hendricks followed. They opened Jerome's door and hauled him out, not gently. Inside the station, the air was stale, heavy with the smell of burnt coffee and old paperwork. The desk sergeant, a middle-aged white man with a mustache, looked up as they entered. "What have we got?" Brennan pushed Jerome forward. "Disorderly conduct, obstruction, failure to comply." The sergeant raised an eyebrow. "Where?" "New Hope Community Church." Subject was aggressive, refused to cooperate, incited the crowd. Jerome spoke for the first time since entering the car. "That's a lie." The sergeant didn't look at him. He typed something into his computer, then said, "Book him." They led Jerome down a narrow hallway to a small room with a bench, a metal table, and a camera in the corner. Brennan removed the cuffs, then stepped back. "Sit," Jerome sat. His wrists ached. He rubbed them slowly, eyes never leaving Brennan's face. "You know you're wrong." Brennan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I know you think you're special because you wear a collar. You're not. I never said I was special. I said I was innocent. Innocent people don't resist. I didn't resist. I stood still." Brennan pushed off the wall and stepped closer. "You want to know what I think? I think you're one of those types. The ones who think the rules don't apply to them. The ones who hide behind religion and play the victim when things don't go their way." Jerome's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "And I think you're someone who's been given power and doesn't know what to do with it except abuse it." Brennan's face flushed. He stepped even closer, close enough that Jerome could smell the coffee on his breath. "Careful, Pastor. You're already in enough trouble. Am I? Or are you?" Before Brennan could respond, the door opened. A tall white man in a pressed uniform stepped inside. His badge read Sergeant Frank Holloway. He glanced at Jerome, then at Brennan. "Step outside." Brennan hesitated, then left. Holloway closed the door behind him. He sat down across from Jerome, folded his hands on the table, and said, "Tell me what happened." Jerome did. He spoke clearly, methodically, recounting every detail from the moment Brennan entered the church to the moment they arrived at the station. Holloway listened without interrupting. When Jerome finished, Holloway leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You're telling me Officer Brennan arrested you in the middle of a church service for no reason. I'm telling you he arrested me based on a false report. I never left the church. I never harassed anyone, and I never resisted." Holloway nodded slowly. "Do you have witnesses?" 80 of them." Holloway's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "All right. Sit tight. I'll be back." He left. Jerome sat alone in the room for what felt like an hour but was probably only 20 minutes. The camera in the corner blinked red. He stared at it, wondering who was watching. Then the door opened again. This time it was a woman, black, in her 40s, wearing a blazer and carrying a briefcase. She smiled faintly. "Pastor Wallace? I'm attorney Denise Simmons. Your congregation called me." Jerome exhaled. "Thank God." Denise sat down, pulled out a notepad, and got to work. "All right. Let's get you out of here." Back at New Hope Community Church, the fellowship hall was packed. Word had spread fast. Members from neighboring congregations had arrived. So had reporters. Gary Peterson, a white journalist from the Richmond Tribune, set up his recorder on one of the folding tables. Beside him, a young black woman with a camera filmed everything. The air buzzed with urgency. Deacon Leonard stood at the front of the room, hands raised, trying to maintain order. "Everyone, please. One at a time. We need to stay organized." Rochelle's voice cut through. "They took him for nothing. We all saw it." "He didn't do anything wrong," Antoine added. "And Brennan was looking for a reason. You could see it in his face. He wanted to arrest somebody." Loretta, sitting at the table with her notes, looked up. "Has anyone identified who made the initial call?" Silence. Leonard frowned. "That's what I thought. We need to find out. Someone called the police and made a false report. That's a crime." Gary Peterson leaned forward, recorder in hand. "Deacon Hayes, can you confirm that Pastor Wallace was inside the church the entire morning?" Leonard nodded. "Absolutely. He arrived at 9:30 a.m. to prepare for the 10 a.m. service. He never left the building until the officers dragged him out." Gary scribbled notes. "And you're saying Officer Brennan accused him of aggressive solicitation outside the church?" "That's what he said. But it's impossible." Pastor Jerome was on the pulpit. Jasmine Porter, a 23-year-old college student and church volunteer, raised her hand from the back of the room. "I was outside before the service started. I was handing out programs. There was no one harassing people. No one even close to the entrance except for us." Gary turned to her. "Did you see anyone who might have called the police?" Jasmine hesitated. "There was a woman, white, maybe in her 50s. She walked past the church, looked at us, then kept walking. She didn't stop or say anything, but she looked, I don't know, annoyed." Rochelle stood up. "Do you remember what she looked like?" "Blonde hair, sunglasses, carrying a purse. She had on a green jacket." Loretta wrote it down. "That's something. If she made the call, we need to find her." Antoine pulled out his phone. "I'll check the neighborhood cameras. Some of the businesses nearby have security footage." Leonard nodded. "Good, do it. We need every piece of evidence we can get." As the room buzzed with activity, Attorney Denise Simmons was across town, sitting in a small gray room at the police precinct with Pastor Jerome. She had reviewed the arrest report, and her expression was a mixture of anger and disbelief. "They charged you with 3 misdemeanors: disorderly conduct, obstruction, and failure to comply. All of it is garbage." Jerome leaned forward. "Can they do this? Can they arrest someone with no evidence? They can arrest anyone for anything. Whether it sticks is another question." Denise tapped her pen on the table. "The problem is, once you're in the system, it takes time to get out. Even if the charges are dropped, you've still been arrested. That's on your record until we fight to expunge it. So what's next?" "Next, I file a motion to dismiss. I also file a complaint against Officer Brennan for false arrest, civil rights violations, and abuse of power. But here's the thing, Pastor. This isn't just about clearing your name. This is about sending a message." Jerome nodded slowly. "I understand." Denise looked at him, her gaze steady. "Do you? Because once we start this, it's going to get loud. The media, the community, the police union, they're all going to come at you. And some people, even people you know, are going to tell you to let it go, to move on, to forgive and forget. I've already forgiven them. But I'm not forgetting." Denise smiled faintly. "Good. Then let's get to work." An hour later, Jerome was released on his own recognizance. No bail, but he had to sign a document promising to appear in court. Denise walked him out of the precinct and into the parking lot, where Deacon Leonard was waiting in his car. When Jerome climbed into the passenger seat, Leonard gripped his shoulder. "You all right?" "I'm fine. Angry, but fine. The church is packed. Everyone's waiting for you." Jerome looked out the window. "Then let's not keep them waiting." When they arrived at New Hope, the parking lot was overflowing. Cars lined the street. People stood on the steps holding signs. Justice for Pastor Jerome. Hands off our church. We will not be silenced. When Jerome stepped out of the car, the crowd erupted into applause. He raised a hand, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement. Then he walked inside. The sanctuary was standing room only. Every pew was filled. People lined the walls. Rochelle was crying. Antoine was filming. Loretta stood at the front, arms crossed, waiting. Jerome walked down the aisle slowly, taking it all in. When he reached the pulpit, he placed both hands on the lectern and looked out at the faces staring back at him. "I'm going to say this once," he began, voice steady. "What happened today was wrong." But it wasn't surprising, because this is what happens when power goes unchecked, when bias is allowed to hide behind a badge, when people think they can walk into a sacred space and demand submission. The room was silent. But here's what they didn't count on. They didn't count on you. They didn't count on a congregation that refuses to be intimidated. They didn't count on phones that record, voices that speak, and faith that doesn't bend. Someone shouted, "Amen." Jerome continued, "So here's what we're going to do. We're going to fight, not with violence, not with hatred, but with truth. We're going to make sure everyone knows what happened here today, and we're going to make sure it never happens again." The applause was deafening, but Jerome wasn't finished. "And let me be clear. This isn't just about me. This is about every black man who's been harassed for existing, every black woman who's been profiled for breathing, every child who's been taught to fear the people who are supposed to protect them. This is about all of us." The room erupted again, and as Jerome stood there surrounded by his congregation, he realized something. Officer Brennan had made a mistake. He'd thought arresting a pastor would silence a church, but all he'd done was wake it up. The days following Pastor Jerome's arrest moved fast. By Monday morning, the video Rochelle had recorded was everywhere. Local news stations picked it up first, then national outlets. CNN ran a segment. MSNBC interviewed Deacon Leonard. Even international news platforms began reporting on the incident. The headline was always some variation of the same thing. Pastor arrested in his own church during Sunday service. Attorney Denise Simmons filed a formal complaint against Officer Dale Brennan with the Richmond Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. She also drafted a lawsuit alleging false arrest, civil rights violations, and religious discrimination. But she knew that lawsuits took time, and the court of public opinion moved faster. So she gave interviews, lots of them. On Tuesday morning, she appeared on a local morning show. The host, a white woman in her 30s with perfectly styled hair, leaned forward with concern etched on her face. "Attorney Simmons, thank you for joining us. Can you walk us through what happened on Sunday?" Denise didn't sugarcoat it. Pastor Jerome Wallace was conducting a worship service when Officer Dale Brennan entered the church and, without justification, accused him of a crime he did not commit. Despite the presence of dozens of witnesses who could verify that Pastor Wallace had been inside the church the entire morning, Officer Brennan proceeded to arrest him in front of his congregation. And what was the alleged crime? Aggressive solicitation and loitering, both of which are impossible given that Pastor Wallace never left the building. The host frowned. "So you're saying the officer made a false arrest?" "I'm saying the officer abused his power, violated my client's constitutional rights, and desecrated a place of worship in the process." The interview went viral. By Wednesday, protests had begun, not just in Richmond, but in cities across the country. People gathered outside police precincts, holding signs, chanting, demanding accountability. New Hope Community Church became a symbol, and Pastor Jerome, whether he wanted to be or not, became a face of resistance. But not everyone was on his side. On Wednesday evening, the Richmond Police Union released a statement defending Officer Brennan. It read in part, "Officer Brennan responded to a legitimate call for service and acted in accordance with department policy. The allegations against him are unfounded and represent a coordinated attack on law enforcement. We stand by our officer and urge the public to withhold judgment until all the facts are known." The statement ignited fury. Rochelle posted a response on social media. "The facts are known. We have video. We have witnesses. What more do you need?" Her post was shared thousands of times within hours. Inside New Hope, the congregation was meeting nightly. They were no longer just planning a defense. They were planning a movement. Antoine had compiled security footage from 3 nearby businesses. The footage showed Jasmine handing out programs outside the church entrance. It showed congregants arriving and entering the building. It showed no one harassing anyone. And most importantly, it showed a blonde woman in a green jacket walking past, stopping, pulling out her phone, and making a call. "That's her," Jasmine said, pointing at the screen. "That's the woman I saw." Loretta leaned in. "Can we identify her?" Antoine shook his head. "Not from this. The angle's too far, but we know she made a call right after passing the church. That's enough to raise questions." Deacon Leonard folded his arms. "We need to find her. If she made a false report, she needs to be held accountable." Denise, who had joined them for the evening meeting, nodded. "I'll subpoena the 911 call logs. If she's the one who called, her number will be on record. From there, we can identify her." By Thursday, Denise had the logs, and she had a name: Rebecca Stone. A 54-year-old white woman who lived 3 blocks from New Hope Community Church. Denise wasted no time. She filed a motion to compel Rebecca to testify and sent a formal request to the district attorney's office to investigate her for filing a false police report. Rebecca Stone, however, had already gone into hiding. Her social media accounts were deactivated. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Neighbors said she hadn't been home in days. But the damage was done. Her name was public, and the internet did what the internet does. Within 24 hours, her photograph, her address, and her employment history were circulating online. People were angry. Some sent threats. Others just demanded answers. On Friday, the Richmond Police Department held a press conference. Police Chief Daniel Russo, a white man in his 60s with graying hair and a tired expression, stood behind a podium flanked by microphones. He read from a prepared statement. "The Richmond Police Department takes all allegations of misconduct seriously. We have launched an internal investigation into the events of Sunday, October 29th. Officer Dale Brennan has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of that investigation. We are committed to transparency and accountability." But when reporters began asking questions, the tone shifted. Gary Peterson, the journalist from the Richmond Tribune, raised his hand. "Chief Russo, the 911 call that prompted the arrest has been identified as coming from a woman who does not appear to have witnessed any crime. Will she be charged?" Russo hesitated. "That's a matter for the district attorney's office, not the police department." Another reporter jumped in. "But Chief, if the call was false, doesn't that mean Officer Brennan arrested Pastor Wallace without cause?" Russo's jaw tightened. Officer Brennan responded to a call for service. He acted on the information he had at the time. Gary pressed. "But the information was false, and there were 80 witnesses who could have confirmed that. Why didn't Officer Brennan verify before making an arrest?" Russo didn't answer. He simply said no further questions and walked off the stage. The press conference only fueled the fire. That evening, a protest was organized outside the police headquarters. Hundreds of people showed up. They carried signs. They chanted. They demanded justice. And standing at the front of the crowd holding a megaphone was Pastor Jerome Wallace. "I'm here today not as a victim, but as a voice," he said, his words echoing across the street. "I'm here to say that what happened to me happens to people every single day. And we're tired of it. We're tired of being profiled. We're tired of being criminalized. We're tired of being told to sit down and be quiet while our rights are trampled." The crowd roared. "But let me be clear. This isn't about one bad officer. This is about a system that protects bad officers. A system that allows people to call the police on us for existing. A system that treats black bodies as threats and white comfort as law." The crowd roared again. "So we're not just asking for Officer Brennan to be fired. We're demanding reform. We're demanding accountability. We're demanding that the people who are supposed to protect us actually do their jobs." As Jerome spoke, cameras captured every word. News helicopters circled overhead. And inside the police headquarters, officers watched from the windows, faces unreadable. When the protest ended, Jerome returned to New Hope. The sanctuary was full again. People had come from all over the state. Some had driven for hours. They filled the pews, the aisles, the balcony. And when Jerome walked to the pulpit, they stood and applauded for a full minute. He waited for the applause to die down. Then he spoke. "I want to thank every single one of you for being here, for standing with me, for standing with us. But I also want to remind you of something. This fight isn't over. It's just beginning. And if we're going to win, we have to stay united. We have to stay focused, and we have to stay faithful." Someone shouted, "We're with you, Pastor." Jerome nodded. "Then let's finish what we started." By Saturday, the story had taken on a life of its own. National civil rights organizations had issued statements in support of Pastor Jerome. The NAACP sent representatives to Richmond. The ACLU pledged legal support, and several prominent activists and religious leaders announced they would be traveling to New Hope for a solidarity rally on Sunday, exactly 1 week after the arrest. But not everyone was rallying behind Jerome. On Saturday afternoon, a counter-protest was organized by a group calling themselves Citizens for Law and Order. About 50 people showed up outside New Hope, holding signs that read "Back the Blue and Stop Playing the Race Card." They chanted slogans, blocked the sidewalk, and filmed anyone entering or leaving the church. Rochelle, arriving for a planning meeting, had to walk through the crowd. Someone shouted at her, "Your pastor's a liar." She kept walking, head high, but her hands were shaking by the time she got inside. "They're out there harassing people," she said, voice tight. "Just standing there trying to intimidate us." Deacon Leonard sighed. "Let them." "We're not changing course," Antoine disagreed. "We should go back out there. Confront them." Leonard shook his head. "No, that's what they want. They want us to react so they can say we're the aggressors. We stay inside. We stay focused," Loretta nodded. "He's right. We've come this far because we've been smart. Let's not lose that now." Inside the fellowship hall, plans for Sunday's rally were finalized. A stage would be set up outside the church. Speakers would include Pastor Jerome, Attorney Denise Simmons, representatives from the NAACP and ACLU, and several local pastors. Security would be provided by volunteers from nearby congregations. And every major news outlet had confirmed they'd be there, but the tension was palpable. Everyone knew that Sunday could go one of two ways. It could be a powerful demonstration of unity and resistance, or it could explode into chaos. That evening, Jerome sat alone in his office, a small room off the side of the sanctuary. The walls were lined with books, theology, history, social justice. His desk was cluttered with papers, notes, and his well-worn Bible. He opened it to the book of Amos and read aloud to himself, "But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." He closed the book and leaned back in his chair. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Denise. DA's office just called. "They're reviewing the case against Brennan. No promises, but it's movement." Jerome exhaled. Movement. That was something. Not victory, but not surrender either. On Sunday morning, the streets around New Hope Community Church were packed. News vans lined the block. Cameras were everywhere. The counter-protesters had returned, but they were vastly outnumbered. Hundreds of people had gathered in support of Jerome. Some had traveled from other states. They held signs, sang hymns, and prayed. At 10 a.m., the rally began. Pastor Jerome stepped onto the stage outside the church, and the crowd erupted. He raised his hands, and they quieted. "1 week ago, I was arrested in that sanctuary behind me. I was cuffed, dragged out, and humiliated. But I'm still here, and so are you." The crowd cheered. They thought they could silence me. They thought they could silence me. They thought they could silence us. But I'm still here, and so are you. The crowd cheered. They thought they could walk into our church and take away our dignity. They thought a badge and a pair of handcuffs would be enough to break our spirit. But what they didn't understand is that our spirit doesn't come from comfort. It comes from struggle. It comes from generations of people who stood when they were told to kneel, who spoke when they were told to be silent, who believed in justice even when justice seemed impossible. The applause swelled. Jerome continued, his voice rising. "So let me say this clearly. We are not asking for permission to be treated like human beings. We are demanding it. We are not begging for respect. We are claiming it. And we are not waiting for someone else to fight this battle for us. We are fighting it ourselves." Attorney Denise Simmons stepped to the microphone next. She was calm, precise, and devastating. Officer Dale Brennan violated the law. He violated Pastor Wallace's constitutional rights. And he violated the sacred trust that should exist between law enforcement and the community. But here's what makes this case different. We have evidence. We have video. We have witnesses. And we have a community that refuses to back down. She paused, letting the words sink in. The district attorney's office is reviewing this case. And I want to be clear about what we're asking for. We're not just asking for the charges against Pastor Wallace to be dropped. We're asking for Officer Brennan to be charged. We're asking for Rebecca Stone, the woman who made the false 911 call, to be charged. And we're asking for systemic reform in how the Richmond Police Department handles complaints, conducts arrests, and engages with communities of color. The crowd erupted again. Denise stepped back and a representative from the NACP took the stage. Then a local pastor, then a civil rights activist. Each one added their voice, their story, their demand for justice. And with each speech the energy grew, but across the street the counter-protesters were getting louder. They shouted over the speakers. They waved their signs. One man with a megaphone kept yelling, "All lives matter. Stop dividing us." Security volunteers formed a loose line between the two groups, not to provoke, but to protect. Then something shifted. A young black woman, no more than 20, walked up to the man with the megaphone. Her name was Shanice Coleman, a student at Virginia Commonwealth University. She didn't shout. She didn't push. She just stood in front of him and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "My brother was killed by police 3 years ago. He was 17, he was unarmed, and no one ever apologized. So when I say Black Lives Matter, I'm not dividing anyone. I'm asking you to see him, to see us, to see that our lives have value too." The man with the megaphone didn't respond. He just stared at her. Then slowly he lowered the megaphone. Someone in the crowd started clapping. Then more. Then everyone. Shanice walked back to the rally, tears streaming down her face, and the counter-protesters for the first time that morning went silent. Jerome saw it happen from the stage. He saw the power of her words, the courage in her voice, and he realized something profound. This movement wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every Shanice, every person who had been silenced, every family who had lost someone, every community that had been ignored, and it was growing. As the rally continued, journalists circulated through the crowd, conducting interviews. Gary Peterson from the Richmond Tribune spoke with Deacon Leonard. "Deacon Hayes, do you believe this will lead to real change?" Leonard thought for a moment. "I don't know, but I know we're not giving up until it does." Rochelle was interviewed by a national news network. "What do you want people to understand about what happened here?" Rochelle looked directly into the camera. "I want them to understand that this could have been any of us. Pastor Jerome was arrested because someone decided he didn't belong. But this is his church. This is our church. And we belong here. We belong everywhere." By noon, the rally had drawn over 1,000 people. It was peaceful, powerful, and impossible to ignore. And inside the Richmond Police Department headquarters, Chief Daniel Russo was watching the live coverage on his office television. His face was unreadable, but his assistant could see the tension in his shoulders. "Sir," the assistant said quietly, "the mayor's office called. They want to meet with you and representatives from New Hope." Russo didn't take his eyes off the screen. "Set it up." That evening, as the sun set over Richmond, Jerome sat in the sanctuary alone. The rally was over. The crowds had dispersed. The news vans had left. But the fight was far from finished. He knelt at the altar, hands folded, and prayed, not for vengeance, not for recognition, but for strength to continue and wisdom to lead well. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Denise. Meeting with the mayor scheduled for Tuesday. DA's office confirmed they're moving forward with the investigation into Brennan. "We're winning, Pastor." Jerome read the message twice. Winning. Maybe. But he knew that real victory wouldn't come from one meeting or one investigation. It would come from sustained pressure, from continued organizing, from a community that refused to let this moment fade into the background. He stood, walked to the pulpit, and looked out at the empty pews. Then he spoke aloud, to no one and to everyone. "We're not done yet." Tuesday morning arrived cold and overcast. Pastor Jerome, Attorney Denise Simmons, Deacon Leonard Hayes, and Loretta Sanders walked into Richmond City Hall together. The building was imposing, all marble and history, with high ceilings and portraits of former mayors lining the walls. They were escorted to a conference room on the 3rd floor where Mayor Catherine Ellis, a white woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and a reputation for political pragmatism, sat waiting alongside Chief Daniel Russo and 2 city attorneys. The mayor stood and extended her hand. "Pastor Wallace, thank you for coming." Jerome shook her hand but didn't smile. Mayor Ellis, they all took their seats. The room was tense, formal, like a negotiation between adversaries rather than public servants and citizens. The mayor folded her hands on the table and began. "Let me start by saying that what happened to you was unacceptable. As mayor, I want to apologize on behalf of the city." Denise cut in immediately. "With all due respect, Mayor, we're not here for apologies. We're here for action. The mayor nodded slowly. I understand. And that's why I've asked Chief Russo to brief you on the steps being taken. Chief Russo cleared his throat. He looked uncomfortable, like a man forced to defend something he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. Officer Dale Brennan has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of our internal investigation. That investigation is ongoing, and we expect to have preliminary findings within 2 weeks. Leonard leaned forward. 2 weeks? It's been over a week already, and the evidence is clear. There's video. There are witnesses. What more do you need? Russo's jaw tightened. Deacon Hayes, I understand your frustration, but internal investigations have procedures. We have to interview all parties, review all evidence, and ensure due process. Loretta spoke next, her voice calm but cutting. Due process for the officer who violated Pastor Jerome's rights. But where was due process when he was arrested? Where was the procedure then? Russo didn't have an answer. The mayor intervened. We're committed to transparency. Once the investigation is complete, the findings will be made public. Denise pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. This is a formal demand from New Hope Community Church and the coalition of civil rights organizations supporting Pastor Wallace. We're calling for Officer Brennan's termination, criminal charges for false arrest, and charges against Rebecca Stone for filing a false police report. We're also calling for a comprehensive review of RPD's arrest procedures, bias training for all officers, and the establishment of a civilian oversight board. The mayor picked up the folder but didn't open it. These are significant requests. They're not requests. They're demands, Denise replied. And if they're not met, we will continue to organize, to protest, and to sue. One of the city attorneys, a younger man with wire-rimmed glasses, leaned in and whispered something to the mayor. She nodded, then turned back to the group. We're willing to consider the oversight board. That's something the city council has discussed before. But termination and criminal charges are not decisions I can make. Those are up to the police department and the district attorney's office. Jerome finally spoke, his voice low and steady. Mayor Ellis, I didn't ask to be the face of this movement. I didn't want to be arrested. I didn't want any of this. But it happened. And now that it has, I have a responsibility to make sure it means something. So let me be clear. We're not going away. We're not backing down, and we're not settling for half measures. The room went silent. The mayor studied Jerome for a long moment, then nodded. I hear you, Pastor, and I'll do what I can. The meeting ended with no concrete agreements, only vague promises and political language. As they walked out of City Hall, Deacon Leonard muttered, That was a waste of time. Denise shook her head. No, it wasn't. Now they know we're serious. And now they know we're organized, Loretta added. And now they know we have leverage. Jerome stopped on the steps outside City Hall and looked back at the building. They'll move when they have no other choice. So let's make sure they have no other choice. That afternoon, news broke that the district attorney's office had officially opened an investigation into Officer Dale Brennan. It was a small step, but it was movement. And movement, Jerome knew, was everything. But that same afternoon, something else happened. Rebecca Stone, the woman who had made the false 911 call, released a statement through her attorney. It read, I made a call to police because I observed behavior that I believed to be suspicious. I had no intention of causing harm to Pastor Wallace or anyone else. I deeply regret any distress this situation has caused. The statement was carefully worded, almost apologetic, but it stopped short of admitting wrongdoing. And it infuriated the community. Rochelle posted a response online within minutes. You saw a black man standing outside a church and called the police. That's not suspicious. That's racist. The post went viral. By evening, Rebecca Stone's statement had been dissected, criticized, and rejected by thousands of people online. Her lawyer released a follow-up statement saying she would not be making any further public comments and requesting privacy. But privacy was not something the internet granted easily. By Wednesday morning, Rebecca Stone's home address had been shared online. People began showing up at her house, leaving signs in her yard, shouting at her through the windows. It escalated quickly, and by Wednesday afternoon, police had to station a patrol car outside her home for her protection. Jerome heard about it during a meeting at the church. Antoine brought it up, sounding satisfied. Good. Let her feel what it's like to be harassed. Jerome shook his head. No, that's not what we're about. Antoine frowned. She made a false report that got you arrested. Why are you defending her? I'm not defending her, but I'm not endorsing harassment either. We want justice, not revenge. Rochelle, sitting nearby, added, Pastor, I get what you're saying, but people are angry. They have a right to be. They do, Jerome agreed. But anger without discipline becomes chaos. And chaos doesn't lead to change. It leads to more pain. Loretta nodded in agreement. He's right. If we want to win this, we have to stay focused. We can't let emotions derail everything we've built. Antoine didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue. The meeting continued, but the tension lingered. Later that evening, Jerome addressed it directly during a prayer service. The sanctuary was full again, not quite as packed as Sunday, but still more people than a typical Wednesday night. Jerome stood at the pulpit and spoke carefully. I know many of you are angry. I'm angry too, but I want to remind you of something. Our fight is not with individuals. It's with systems. Rebecca Stone made a terrible choice, and she should be held accountable. But she's not the enemy. The enemy is the bias that made her see a black man and assume criminality. The enemy is the system that allowed a false report to lead to an arrest without verification. The enemy is the culture that taught her, and people like her, to fear us instead of know us. He paused, letting the words settle. So when you go home tonight, I'm asking you to channel your anger into action. Write to the mayor. Call your city council members. Attend the city council meetings. Support the oversight board. But don't harass anyone. Don't threaten anyone. Because the moment we stoop to that level, we lose the moral high ground, and that's the only ground worth standing on. The congregation listened. Some nodded. Others looked conflicted. But when Jerome finished, they stood and applauded. Not because they all agreed, but because they trusted him. And trust in a movement like this was everything. That night, as Jerome drove home, he felt the weight of it all. The rallies, the meetings, the interviews, the constant pressure to be strong, to be wise, to be perfect. He was tired. But he couldn't stop, not yet. Not until this fight was won. He pulled into his driveway and sat in the car for a moment, engine off, staring at his front door. Then his phone buzzed. It was a text from Denise. DA's office just announced they're convening a grand jury to review the case against Brennan. This is big, Pastor. This is real. Jerome read the message 3 times. Then he closed his eyes and whispered, Thank you. The grand jury convened on a gray Monday morning in late November. Denise Simmons had prepared Pastor Jerome for what to expect. A room full of strangers, a prosecutor asking questions, and the heavy burden of reliving the worst moment of his life in clinical detail. Jerome sat outside the courtroom in a narrow hallway with hard benches and fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Deacon Leonard sat beside him, silent but steady. Inside, the process was methodical. The prosecutor, a black woman in her 40s named District Attorney Lydia Grant, presented the case piece by piece. She called witnesses. Rochelle testified, describing the arrest in vivid detail. Jasmine testified about what she saw outside the church. Antoine testified about the security footage. And then finally, Jerome was called in. He sat in the witness chair, raised his right hand, and swore to tell the truth. D.A. Grant asked him to recount the events of that Sunday morning, and he did. He spoke clearly, without emotion, just facts. When he finished, one of the grand jurors, an older white man, asked, Did you at any point resist arrest? No, sir. Did you raise your voice or make any threatening gestures? No, sir. Did you ever leave the church building before the officers arrived? No, sir. The grand jury deliberated for 3 hours. Jerome waited in the hallway the entire time, praying, thinking, and occasionally checking his phone. Denise sat with him for part of it, reassuring him that the evidence was overwhelming. But they both knew that overwhelming evidence didn't always lead to justice. Finally, the door opened. DeGrant stepped out, her expression neutral. Jerome stood. She walked over, and for a brief moment he couldn't read her face. Then she said quietly, They indicted him. Jerome exhaled, a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. What does that mean? It means Officer Dale Brennan will face criminal charges for false arrest and deprivation of rights under color of law. He'll be arraigned next week. Deacon Leonard clasped Jerome's shoulder. Denise allowed herself a small smile. This is a victory, Pastor. A real one. Jerome nodded, but he didn't celebrate, not yet, because he knew that an indictment was just the beginning, not the end. By that afternoon, the news was everywhere. Officer Dale Brennan had been indicted. The Richmond Police Union released a furious statement condemning the decision and pledging to support Brennan. But the community, Jerome's community, erupted in celebration. Social media lit up. News outlets ran segments. And outside New Hope Community Church, people gathered spontaneously, hugging, crying, and praising God. But while the community celebrated, Officer Brennan was sitting in a small apartment across town staring at his phone. The calls and texts had been nonstop, some from fellow officers offering support, others from friends distancing themselves. His union representative had assured him they'd fight this, but Brennan wasn't sure anymore. He'd thought he was doing his job. He'd thought he was following procedure. But now he was facing felony charges, and his career, his reputation, everything he'd built was crumbling. His partner, Officer Craig Hendricks, had called earlier that day. Hendricks had been placed on administrative leave too, pending review. His voice had been shaky, uncertain. "Dale, I don't know what to do. They're asking me to testify. Against me?" Brennan had asked. Hendricks hesitated. "They're asking what I saw, what I heard. And what are you going to say?" The line went quiet for a long time. Then Hendricks said softly, "The truth, Dale. I'm going to tell the truth." Brennan had hung up without another word. Now, sitting alone in his apartment, he realized that everything was falling apart, and he didn't know how to stop it. Meanwhile, Rebecca Stone was facing her own reckoning. The district attorney's office had opened an investigation into her false police report, and her attorney had advised her to cooperate fully. On Tuesday afternoon, she was brought in for questioning. D.A. Grant sat across from her in a sterile interview room and asked her to explain, in her own words, why she had called 911. Rebecca's hands trembled as she spoke. "I was walking past the church and I saw people gathered outside. There was a lot of activity. I don't know, it made me uncomfortable." "Why did it make you uncomfortable?" Grant asked. Rebecca looked down. "I don't know. It just did." "Was anyone threatening you?" "No." "Was anyone blocking the sidewalk?" "No." "Was anyone engaging in illegal activity?" "Not that I could see." Grant leaned forward. "So why did you call the police and report aggressive solicitation?" Rebecca's voice cracked. I thought they might be bothering people. I didn't think it would lead to this. I didn't think anyone would get arrested." Grant didn't blink, but someone did get arrested. A pastor, in his own church. "Because of your call." Rebecca started crying. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Grant let her cry for a moment, then said, "Intentions don't erase consequences. Mrs. Stone, your call led to a false arrest, a violation of civil rights and significant harm to a community. The question now is whether we charge you with filing a false report or if you're willing to take responsibility publicly." Rebecca looked up, mascara streaking her face. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to tell the truth, publicly. I want you to explain why you made that call. And I want you to face the community you hurt." Rebecca's attorney started to object, but Rebecca raised a hand to stop him. "I'll do it." 2 days later, Rebecca Stone appeared at a press conference organized by D.A. Grant's office. She stood at a podium, visibly shaking, and read from a prepared statement. "My name is Rebecca Stone. On October 29th, I called 911 and reported suspicious activity outside New Hope Community Church. That report was false. There was no suspicious activity. There was no crime. I made a judgment based on fear and bias, and because of that, Pastor Jerome Wallace was wrongly arrested. I take full responsibility for my actions, and I am deeply, truly sorry." She paused, tears streaming down her face. "I've spent my whole life thinking I wasn't racist, but this experience has forced me to confront the fact that I carry biases I didn't even know I had, and those biases led me to see danger where there was none. I can't undo what I did, but I can own it, and I can commit to doing better." The press conference was broadcast live. Reactions were mixed. Some people felt her apology was genuine. Others felt it was too little, too late. Jerome watched it from his office at the church, Deacon Leonard and Loretta beside him. When it ended, Loretta said, "What do you think?" Jerome was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think she's scared. And I think she should be. But I also think she said something most people never say. She admitted she was wrong. And that takes courage, even if it's forced." Leonard frowned. "You're more forgiving than I'd be." Jerome shook his head. "I'm not forgiving her, not yet. But I'm acknowledging the first step. Because if we want people to change, we have to leave room for them to do it." Officer Dale Brennan's arraignment took place the following Monday. The courthouse was packed. Supporters of the police filled one side. Supporters of Pastor Jerome filled the other. Security was tight. Metal detectors at every entrance, officers stationed throughout the building. Brennan arrived in a dark suit flanked by his attorney, a sharp-eyed man named Douglas Kramer, who had a reputation for defending cops. Jerome sat in the gallery with Denise, Deacon Leonard, Loretta, Rochelle, and Antoine. The atmosphere was electric, tense, like everyone was holding their breath. When the judge, an older black man named Honorable Vincent Marshall, entered, the room stood. He took his seat, reviewed the file in front of him, and then looked directly at Brennan. "Mr. Brennan, you've been charged with false arrest and deprivation of rights under color of law."
"How do you plead?"
Brennan's attorney stood. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The words hung in the air. Jerome didn't react outwardly, but inside his stomach tightened. He'd known it was coming, but hearing it still stung. Judge Marshall set a trial date for March, 3 months away, and established bail at $50,000. Brennan posted it within an hour and walked out of the courthouse a free man, at least for now. Outside, a small crowd of police officers and union representatives cheered for him. On the other side of the street, protesters held signs demanding justice. Jerome watched from the courthouse steps as Brennan climbed into a car and drove away. Denise stood beside him. "This is going to trial. Are you ready for that?" Jerome nodded slowly. "I don't have a choice." Over the next few weeks, the case consumed everything. Denise filed motions. The defense filed counter-motions. Depositions were scheduled. Witness lists were compiled. And the media coverage never stopped. Every development, no matter how small, was reported, analyzed, and debated. But while the legal battle played out, something else was happening in Richmond. The movement that had started with Jerome's arrest was growing. The demand for a civilian oversight board gained traction. City council meetings were packed with residents demanding reform, and New Hope Community Church became a hub for organizing, education, and activism. Rochelle started a weekly workshop on knowing your rights during police encounters. Antoine partnered with local high schools to teach students about civil rights history. Loretta organized voter registration drives, and Deacon Leonard coordinated with other churches to create a network of support for families affected by police misconduct. Jerome was at the center of it all, but he wasn't alone anymore. The movement had taken on a life of its own, and he was learning to share the leadership. He'd spent so long being the voice that now, he was teaching others to use theirs. One evening in early December, Jerome sat in his office preparing for a speaking engagement when his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Hello? Pastor Wallace?" The voice was male, unfamiliar. "Yes. This is Craig Hendricks." "Officer Hendricks?" Jerome froze. "Officer Hendricks." There was a long pause. Then Hendricks said, "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I needed to call. I needed to tell you that I'm sorry." Jerome didn't respond immediately. He let the silence stretch, forcing Hendricks to continue. "I was there that day. I saw what Dale did. And I didn't stop him. I should have, but I didn't. I've been thinking about that every day since. And I needed you to know that I'm sorry. And I'm going to testify. I'm going to tell the truth." Jerome closed his eyes. "Why are you calling me?" "Because I want you to know that not all of us are like him. Some of us got into this job to help people, and I lost sight of that. But I'm trying to find it again." Jerome took a deep breath. "Officer Hendricks, I appreciate the call. But an apology doesn't undo what happened. And your testimony doesn't erase the fact that you stood there and watched. I know. But," Jerome continued, "if you're serious about finding your way back, then do the work, testify, tell the truth, and then go back to your department and fight for reform from the inside. Because we need people on the inside who are willing to do the right thing." Hendricks was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I will. Thank you, Pastor." The line went dead. Jerome sat there for a long time staring at his phone. Then he stood, walked to the sanctuary, and knelt at the altar. He prayed for strength, for wisdom, for the courage to keep going even when the fight felt endless. Because it was endless. This wasn't just about one case or one officer. It was about a system that had been broken for generations, and fixing it would take more than rallies and lawsuits. It would take time, persistence, and a commitment to never stop pushing. As Christmas approached, the city of Richmond felt different. There was a tension, yes, but also a sense of possibility. The Civilian Oversight Board proposal was moving forward. Officer Brennan's trial was set. And Pastor Jerome Wallace, the man who had been arrested in his own church, had become a symbol of resistance, resilience, and hope. But he didn't feel like a symbol. He felt like a man trying to do the right thing in a world that made it hard. And as he prepared for the trial, for the testimony, for the inevitable media circus, he reminded himself of something his father had told him years ago. Justice isn't a destination, son. It's a journey, and the journey never ends. Jerome held on to those words, because the journey was far from over. January came cold and relentless. Pastor Jerome spent the month preparing for trial. Denise held mock cross-examinations in her office, grilling him with the kind of questions she knew the defense would ask. She was tough, uncompromising, and it frustrated Jerome at times. "Why are you being so hard on me?" he asked after one particularly brutal session. Denise didn't soften. "Because Douglas Kramer is going to be harder. He's going to try to paint you as aggressive, as someone who provoked the situation. He's going to question your credibility, your motives, everything. And if you're not ready, he'll tear you apart on the stand." Jerome nodded. "Then let's keep going." Meanwhile, the defense was building its own case. Kramer had filed motions to exclude certain evidence, including the security footage from the businesses near the church. He argued it was irrelevant since it didn't show the interior of the church. The judge denied the motion, but it was a signal of the strategy to come. Create doubt, muddy the waters, and make the jury question everything. In mid-January, Officer Craig Hendricks gave his deposition. He testified that he had concerns about the arrest from the beginning, that he had tried to suggest verifying the report before taking action, but that Brennan had overruled him. His testimony was damaging to the defense, and when word got out, the police union issued a statement condemning him as a traitor. Hendricks was placed on indefinite leave and effectively ostracized by his colleagues. But he stood by his testimony. When a reporter asked him why he was willing to risk his career, he said simply, "Because it's the right thing to do." As the trial date approached, tensions in Richmond escalated. The police union organized a rally in support of Brennan, drawing hundreds of officers from across the state. They marched through downtown chanting "Blue Lives Matter" and holding signs that read "Support our officers." In response, New Hope Community Church organized a counter-rally. Thousands of people gathered outside the courthouse holding candles, singing hymns, and demanding justice. Jerome spoke briefly, his words measured but firm. "We're not here to attack anyone. We're here to affirm that Black lives matter, that truth matters, and that justice matters, and we will not be silent until we see it." The trial began on the first Monday of March. The courtroom was packed. Cameras were not allowed inside, but sketch artists lined the gallery, capturing every moment. Judge Vincent Marshall presided, his demeanor calm but authoritative. The jury, composed of 7 women and 5 men, 4 black, 6 white, and 2 Hispanic, took their seats. DA Lydia Grant delivered the opening statement for the prosecution. She was composed, confident, and devastating. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about abuse of power. Officer Dale Brennan entered a church, a place of worship, and arrested a man who had committed no crime. He did so without verification, without cause, and without regard for the truth. And in doing so, he violated not only the law, but the trust that every citizen places in law enforcement." She walked the jury through the evidence: the 911 call from Rebecca Stone, the lack of verification, the security footage showing no crime, the testimony of 80 witnesses, and the video of the arrest itself. The evidence will show that Officer Brennan acted not in service of justice, but in service of his own assumptions, biases, and ego. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a crime. Douglas Kramer delivered the defense's opening. He was smooth, persuasive, and strategic. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about abuse of power. It's about a police officer responding to a call for service. Officer Brennan did not wake up that morning looking to arrest someone. He responded to a report of suspicious activity, and he took action based on the information he had. Was it a mistake? Perhaps, but mistakes are not crimes." Kramer painted Brennan as a dedicated officer with a clean record, someone who had served the community for over 20 years. Officer Brennan is not a villain. He's a human being who made a judgment call in a difficult situation, and charging him with a crime for doing his job sets a dangerous precedent for every officer in this country. The trial moved quickly. Witnesses were called. Rochelle testified. her voice steady as she recounted the arrest. Jasmine testified about the security footage. Antoine testified about what he saw. And then on the third day, Pastor Jerome took the stand. D.A. Grant led him through the events of that Sunday morning. Jerome spoke clearly, calmly, and without embellishment. He described the moment Brennan entered the church, the accusation, the arrest, and the humiliation. When Grant asked how it made him feel, Jerome paused. It made me feel like I didn't matter. Like my dignity, my truth, my humanity, none of it mattered to him. And that's the part that hurt the most. When it was Kramer's turn to cross-examine, he came out swinging. Pastor Wallace, you've become quite famous since this incident, haven't you? Jerome frowned. I wouldn't say famous. You've been on television. You've given speeches. You've been interviewed by national media. Would you say this case has raised your profile? Denise objected. Relevance, Your Honor. Judge Marshall sustained it. Move on, Mr. Kramer. Kramer shifted tactics. Pastor Wallace, when Officer Brennan asked you to step outside, why didn't you comply? Because I hadn't done anything wrong. And I wasn't going to be forced out of my own church. So you refused a lawful order from a police officer? It wasn't a lawful order. It was based on a false report. But you didn't know that at the time, did you? Jerome hesitated. Kramer pressed. You didn't know the report was false when Officer Brennan first arrived. So from your perspective, he was simply doing his job. No. From my perspective, he was assuming I was guilty without evidence. Kramer smiled slightly. Assuming. That's an interesting word. Isn't it possible you assumed he was biased when, in fact, he was simply following procedure? Denise stood. Objection. Argumentative. Sustained. Kramer continued for another 20 minutes trying to chip away at Jerome's credibility, but Jerome held firm. When he finally stepped down, he felt exhausted but resolute. The prosecution rested after calling Officer Hendricks, whose testimony was clear and damning. He described Brennan's aggression, his refusal to verify the report, and his dismissive attitude toward the congregation. Under cross-examination, Kramer tried to paint Hendricks as disgruntled, but it didn't land. Hendricks was calm, consistent, and credible. The defense called only 2 witnesses, a use-of-force expert who testified that Brennan's actions were within policy, and Brennan himself. When Brennan took the stand, he was stiff, defensive. He insisted he had acted appropriately, that he had no choice but to arrest Jerome based on the information he had. But under cross-examination by D.A. Grant, cracks appeared. She pressed him on why he didn't verify the report, why he didn't ask for ID before making accusations, why he didn't de-escalate. Brennan's answers were evasive and his frustration showed. Officer Brennan, Grant said, her voice sharp, did you at any point consider that Pastor Wallace might be telling the truth? Brennan hesitated. I considered all possibilities, but you arrested him anyway. I had a job to do. Your job is to protect and serve. Did arresting an innocent man serve anyone? Brennan didn't answer. Officer Brennan's testimony ended in a tense silence. The jurors shifted in their seats, eyes moving between him and D.A. Grant. His insistence that he had no choice rang hollow in the wake of 80 eyewitness accounts, video evidence, and the words of his own partner. The trial recessed for the day. Outside the courthouse steps became a stage for dueling crowds. Supporters of Brennan chanted about protecting police, while supporters of Pastor Jerome sang hymns, voices rising over the noise. Jerome walked past both groups silently, his head high, refusing to be baited. The following morning, closing arguments began. D.A. Grant stood before the jury, calm but fierce. This case is not about hating police. It is about accountability. The law does not grant anyone no badge, no title, the right to strip another person of their dignity and liberty without cause. The evidence shows that Officer Brennan acted without verification, without justification, and in violation of his sworn duty. If the law is to mean anything, it must mean that no one is above it, not even those entrusted to enforce it. Kramer's closing was polished, practiced. He urged the jury not to criminalize mistakes. If you convict Officer Brennan, you send a message that every officer who answers a call risks prosecution for doing their job. He responded to a citizen's concern. He made a difficult judgment. It may not have been perfect, but imperfection is not a crime. The judge gave instructions. The jury filed out, and Richmond waited. Deliberations stretched into the night. In the courthouse hallway, Jerome sat with Denise and his closest supporters, trying to read the silence behind the jury room door. Antoine paced, muttering prayers under his breath. Rochelle scrolled endlessly through her phone, updating community members online. Deacon Leonard sat with his Bible open, whispering scripture. At 10:14 p.m., the bailiff appeared. The jury has reached a verdict. The courtroom filled again, thick with tension. Jerome sat in the front row, hands clasped. Brennan sat across the aisle, pale, eyes hollow. The jury filed in. The foreperson, a middle-aged Latina woman, stood. On the charge of false arrest, we, the jury, find the defendant, Officer Dale Brennan, guilty. A ripple of gasps and whispers spread through the room. On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Jerome closed his eyes. Rochelle cried out softly. Brennan's attorney slumped in his chair. Brennan himself sat frozen, as though the words hadn't landed yet. Judge Marshall thanked the jury, then addressed the defendant. Mr. Brennan, you will remain free on bond until sentencing. This court will reconvene in 30 days to determine your punishment. Outside the courthouse, the scene was electric. Supporters of Jerome erupted in cheers, chants of justice. Filling the night air, news crews scrambled. Reporters shouted questions. But Jerome didn't linger. He raised one hand in acknowledgement, then turned and walked with his congregation back toward New Hope, the weight of the moment sinking in. The days that followed felt like history in motion. The guilty verdict made national headlines. Commentators debated what it meant for policing in America, for accountability, for faith communities under pressure. For Pastor Jerome, it meant something simpler: vindication. The charges against him were formally dropped, his record cleared. Denise Simmons held a press conference outside the courthouse. This is not just a victory for Pastor Wallace, she said. This is a victory for every person who has ever been profiled, silenced, or dismissed. Today proves that the law can work if we demand that it does. Rebecca Stone, the woman whose call had triggered it all, issued another public statement. This time, she didn't hide behind her attorney. I see now that my fear was not about what I saw, but about what I assumed. I was wrong. I caused harm. I can't take it back, but I can try to learn. Some accepted her words. Others dismissed them. But Jerome privately told his congregation that forgiveness was not the same as forgetting. We remember, he said. We remember so we never allow it again. Officer Craig Hendricks testified in disciplinary hearings against Brennan. Though ostracized within his department, he quietly became a bridge between activists and reform-minded officers. Jerome reached out to him, urging him to stay in the fight. Change won't come if every good officer walks away, he told him. 30 days later, Brennan returned to court. The gallery was full again. Judge Marshall reviewed impact statements from Jerome, his congregation, and civil rights groups. Then he delivered his sentence. Mr. Brennan, the jury has found you guilty of abusing the power entrusted to you. You entered a church, arrested a man without cause, and in doing so violated the most fundamental principles of justice. This court sentences you to 2 years in state prison, with 18 months suspended and 5 years of probation. You are also barred from serving as a law enforcement officer in this state ever again. The gavel fell. The courtroom erupted, half in anger, half in relief. Brennan was led away in handcuffs, the same metallic click echoing that Pastor Jerome had endured months earlier. The movement that began with one arrest didn't end with Brennan's conviction. The Richmond City Council voted to establish a civilian oversight board with real authority. Bias training was overhauled. Policies on arrests and verification were rewritten, and New Hope Community Church remained a hub of activism. Its fellowship hall still filled nightly with organizing meetings, workshops, and prayer. For Jerome, the journey was exhausting, but he knew it wasn't over. He still stood at the pulpit each Sunday, Bible in hand, but his sermons carried a new weight. They weren't just about faith, they were about resilience, about the duty to stand when standing is costly. One Sunday morning, months after the verdict, he looked out at his congregation, bigger now, more diverse, united by struggle, and said, "They thought they could silence us. They thought fear would scatter us. But instead they gave us a voice that carries farther than these walls. A voice that says we belong. A voice that says justice is not a dream, it's a demand." The congregation rose to their feet, voices raised in song. And in that moment, it was clear. Pastor Jerome Wallace was no longer just a man who had been arrested. He was a man who had turned injustice into momentum, pain into purpose, and a single act of defiance into a movement that could not be ignored. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time it felt like justice had taken a step forward.